So, of course, Spencer Rattler is the guy that everyone's focused on. The quarterbacks get too much of the credit. They get too much of the blame. And so he's in that category. And he's also in that category as the Oklahoma quarterback. So with that comes more scrutiny, more attention, more... Yeah, in this case, it becomes scrutiny because of the underachievement of the offense, more so than anywhere else. So, in terms of his play, where would you rate his performance on Saturday night versus what we've seen? Does he continue to play pretty much at the same level? Do you see any progression, any regression possibly?
I don't know, Mark, that I necessarily saw any regression out of Spencer Rattler on Saturday. I definitely haven't seen much progression. I think, and he's getting a bulk of the blame, and that's what typically happens. Your offensive coordinator and the starting quarterback are the two guys that typically, if things are going wrong offensively, are going to get a bulk of the of the reaction and the kind of the negative connotation to how things are going. But I think the things that he has struggled with at times, he's still continuing to struggle with. And I think that, and we'll get into this, but I think that's a lot of it's a byproduct of the struggles on the offensive line. But I think you see him making predetermined reads of where he's going with the ball pre-snap. I think that you're seeing him, and again, this is part of the offensive line as well. He's not stepping up into the pocket as much as you would expect, and he's kind of moving side to side. There was a play late. No, this wasn't late. This was in the first quarter where this is kind of before the booing kind of started in the first half, where he threw from the right hash to the left hash, threw a ball, and it just hung up in the air a long time and allowed West Virginia to, I think it was a tip, and then one of the other guys, Witten, got it. He had a couple of guys open deep. He missed Drake Stoops, which he actually beat the safety deep and had a couple of steps on the guy, overthrew him. He had Mike Woods, who played really well, one of the lone bright spots on the offense for Oklahoma on Saturday. He had him, really on a post pattern. And if he throws him open in the middle of the field, it's probably a touchdown, but he throws him towards the sideline and lets the West Virginia defender was able to kind of pin him into the sideline a little bit. So there's some things that you're continuously seeing from him. And I think based on where Oklahoma is offensively from an offensive line perspective, they need Rattler to be great, not good. He's got to be great to deal with some of the inefficiencies that we've seen so far on the offensive line.
Because the numbers do look good, not great. The most recent against the Mountaineers, 26 of 36, 256 yards, a touchdown, and a pick. So Jason has obviously outlined Spencer's play here against West Virginia, as he has every week and does post-game with all of you. So keep in mind, don't forget, after each and every Oklahoma game, Jason is right here, the voice of college football, Oklahoma, to break down the Sooners' play. And again, Kansas State is the opponent coming up this week. And Sooner fans, you don't have to be reminded of the last two outcomes against the Wildcats. So with the Sooners playing the way they are right now, of course, they're a substantial favorite, but this game's got to be called into question. And the way this league play is starting to play out, it could be a much more interesting conference schedule than we anticipated. With Oklahoma's going to be in the championship game for sure. Iowa State will probably be there. Let's go ahead and play the games and see how it plays out, because Baylor had something to say about it, of course, on Saturday, and Oklahoma State's playing some good football with recent wins impressively over Kansas State and a good win against Boise State out of conference. So there's the analysis of the play on the field. Now let's get to what ensued in the stadium. And it was even addressed on the ABC broadcast after the game to a certain extent. The sideline reporter, I believe it was Holly Rowe, acknowledged that it wasn't the best of nights for Spencer in terms of the response from the fans at Oklahoma. And he certainly took a pretty tactful and professional way to address it, but at the same time, let his feelings be known that he didn't appreciate it. And I think that's certainly understandable. So this brings up just an interesting topic about booing collegiate athletes in the scenario that we saw play out on Saturday, Jason.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right, Mark. And I think to Spencer Rattler's credit, he played much better in the second half. You'd mentioned his totals, 26 out of 36. I think he was 10 for 17 at halftime. So he was much more efficient in the second half. And, obviously Oklahoma wasn't able to put as many points on the board as you would like, obviously. But he was more efficient. And then so in terms of his comments, I think he's a little brash, and I think he's a little cocky, which you like to have in a quarterback, obviously. So I think that kind of came across a little bit in some of his comments, specifically some of the comments that he made last week where, he's kind of getting heat from some of the fans. And then obviously it came full circle Saturday with the booing that kind of ensued in the second quarter. Didn't hear it as much in the second half, but mostly in the second quarter. It is mostly from the student section. I don't think from everything that I've heard, it wasn't really by and large from the general capacity. It was more from the student section. So that kind of leads you to believe what kind of a student life does he have? Is he a guy that's just not really well liked, well respected among the student population? But Mark, in terms of the whole thought and the around booing players, I was a season ticket holder for almost 20 years. Been to games where Oklahoma has had a really good team, a really good offensive team, and then was there through some of the Blake and Schnellenberger years where it's not even close to what it is today, even now what it is today. I've never been a guy that has felt a need or been inclined to boo a collegiate athlete. I know that NIL brings a different maybe perspective for some people into that, but at the same time, there's still, from a on the field perspective, they're still an amateur athlete. They're still a college athlete, not actually a person that's getting paid to play the game. So I'm a little indifferent about it. I mean, just in terms of it's not anything that I would ever do. Now, do I think it's something that anybody has the prerogative to do as a paying member? It's not like anything else. If you go to, I don't know, if you go to like a production of a play or something, like you pay your money if you don't like the performance or whatever. I mean, I think whoever the person is that is purchasing that has the right and has that to be able to do that, but not something that I would ever do. But I don't have a huge issue with it. But again, you feel sorry for the kid. I know he has a lot of expectations on top of him right now with the Heisman, and kind of being the front runner, now completely out of it, and Oklahoma struggling offensively, and so maybe it didn't come across as though he handled it well, but at the same time, like in the heat of the moment, how do you handle it? How do you handle being booed and knowing that you have people in the stands that want the backup guy to play? So it's hard, but like I said, I've never even considered booing a player. It's just not something that ever came into my thought process ever. But don't necessarily have a huge problem if fans decide that's how they want to exercise their excitement or lack thereof.
I think this is a fascinating topic. And there are so many different ways to take this. So like you, I've never shown up at a stadium and booed players. It's just not something, again, I haven't necessarily processed it to think, okay, does that player deserve to be booed because he's missed 10 consecutive passes or because he's 0 for 4 with 3 strikeouts or whatever the case might be. It's just not something that I've processed. I do believe it to be the right of the paying customer to do that. We live in America, and as long as it's not personal they're not calling out that particular person and some of their traits as an individual or their family members or anything like that, and it's just strictly um, talking about their performance and a response to the performance, then I don't like it, but I want us to have freedoms in this country that are protected. So, as a paying customer and an American, I believe people have the right to do it. I do think that you make an interesting point about that coming from the student section, because typically I think of the typical booing fan at a collegiate event to be the 60-year-old alumni who demands perfection and for the criticism and that type of response to come from that section of the fan base, not from the students themselves. Even with NIL, I, like you, or at least how it sounds from what you just stated, I don't consider these to be paid athletes. They're not being paid by the school. They have now the opportunity to earn money outside of the school. So the school's not paying them. The conference, they're not being directly paid for their football performance. They're now open to the opportunity of earning money outside because of their football performance, but they're almost like of a celebrity status of earning endorsements, but they're not paid by the school. The other aspect of this that I think from the fan standpoint that I feel just to really shows and reflects on the character of such people is just, at what point do you boo? The only justification that I can think of for booing an athlete is if you feel as though that they're not giving the effort. They're out there to give 100%, to lay it all on the line. And if you feel as though they're not hustling, they're not trying their hardest, okay, I can see that. Otherwise, if they're out there doing their best, if you're not satisfied with their performance, maybe the person that should be booed would be the coach, because he's responsible for putting them out there.
Sure.
So if they're doing their best, then the other part of this is just the frivolous nature of being a fan that will boo you 1 minute, and then if things go better the next series, the next play, then suddenly we're cheering for you. So
no. Yeah.
You wonder about the athlete's attitude sometimes, because we sometimes criticize athletes for being arrogant or being standoffish, but I think they also understand the nature of this, that they're only as good or valued as much as their last game or their last performance. And on a dime, they could go from being the most popular person in town and pats on the back and cheers to, as soon as they struggle, even if they're giving just as much effort, the fans are going to turn on them and suddenly they get booed. So it seems like a very frivolous and petty way to approach being a fan, that I'm going to support you when things are going well. When things aren't going well, suddenly I'll turn on you just like that.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And I think, Mark, there's a few points that you made that I kind of wanted to unpack a little bit. And so, on top of the booing, there was booing is one thing, but then there's also the "We Want Caleb" chants on top of it, which is now, to your point, Mark, about giving effort. If they wanted to boo the offensive line, have absolutely no issues or qualms with that whatsoever, based on the performance and based on, and we'll get into this, but based on just some sheer lack of effort by a couple of those guys on the offensive line, that could have been well deserved. However, and I think, I know that we've discussed this a little bit, in terms of what Lincoln Riley did last year with inserting Tanner Mordecai a little bit, by the way, who's having a fantastic year for SMU, but inserting him and just kind of calming Spencer Rattler down a little bit. But it's such a risky proposition to input no matter who it is, the backup quarterback. Ask Paul Chris in Wisconsin how that worked out, how that's working out for them right now with Graham Mertz, because you're in a situation. if you put in Caleb Williams and he is lights out, then you almost have to play him. And then what do you do if he struggles? I mean, Spencer Rattler's probably. I mean, he's probably gone at that point. He's either, you know what I mean. He's probably declaring for the draft and just either opting out or he's transferring. And then, the other thing is you put Caleb Williams in and he struggles just in the same manner, and then you put in Rattler back in there, and he's lost any type of confidence that he already had before. So, I don't know. I'm not necessarily a proponent of putting Caleb Williams in there. If you lose a game, and let's say for the sake of argument here, obviously no one watching this really wants this to happen, but Oklahoma loses to Kansas State for a third straight year. Rattler throws 3 interceptions, let's say. Then I think you can. Then I think maybe you can look at making that change, or at least have the conversation, Mark. But I think now, if you're just in a situation where you're struggling to get some cohesion, you're struggling from an offensive perspective. Hey, if your offensive line is lights out, your wide receivers are wide open all over the field, and your quarterback's just not able to get it to him, that's one thing. But with the struggle that they're having on the offensive line, you can't put all of this or even the lion's share of the blame on Rattler right now.